Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains.
It's got to be one of the most famous opening lines in the history of political philosophy, maybe the most famous.
It really is. It's iconic. You see it on T-shirts, in textbooks. But if you actually stop and think about it, well, it's incredibly depressing.
It is. It sounds like a prison sentence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you were born free, but sorry about the chains.
It does sound bleak. But for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, writing back in 1762, that wasn't just him complaining, it was the setup for this massive puzzle.
He wasn't saying just break the chains and run for the hills.
Not at all. He was asking a much harder question. Is there a way to make the chains legitimate?
And that is exactly what we're doing today. We are doing a deep dive into Rousseau's masterpiece, Du Contrat Social, or The Social Contract. And the mission here is pretty high stakes.
It really is.
We need to figure out if it's actually possible to build a society that doesn't just crush the individual.
Right. Rousseau is trying to square a circle here. He wants to find a form of association where we can live together, protect each other with the force of the whole group, but
And here's the kicker.
but still be as free as we were before, as free as you were in the wild.
Which just sounds logically impossible. I mean, if I join a group, I have to follow rules. If I follow rules, I'm not wild and free anymore.
That's the paradox. And to solve it, Rousseau takes us through some ideas that are going to sound, I think, radical even today. We're going to look at why he thinks true democracy is actually impossible for human beings.
We'll also see why he thinks the phrase might makes right is just complete nonsense. Not just morally, but logically.
And the one that always stings for modern listeners. Why paying taxes so someone else can run the government for you might actually be the moment you lose your freedom for good.
So, let's start where he starts. Before he can build his ideal society, he has to tear down all the old assumptions about why some people get to be in charge.
He goes right for the throat of that natural authority argument. In his day, the standard line was that a king is like a father. The authority is just natural.
And Rousseau sort of buys the father part, right?
Right.
He admits families are natural.
Only up to a point. He says the family is the only natural society. But think about it. How long does that authority actually last?
Until the kid can feed himself, I guess.
Exactly. The second the child doesn't need the father for self-preservation, the natural bond just dissolves. If they stay together after that, it's not nature anymore.
It's a choice. It's a convention.
Precisely. So you can't use the my house, my rules logic to explain why a king owns an entire country.
But what about simple force? This is the right of the strongest. If I have the biggest army, the biggest stick, I'm in charge. He has that really vivid image for this, the brigand in the woods.
It's a great visual. He says, imagine a robber holds you up at gunpoint in a forest. You hand over your purse. Now, do you hand it over because you should, morally, or just because you must?
Because I must. I don't want to get shot. It's necessity, not duty. I'm not thinking, yes, this man has a moral right to my wallet.
Right, and you can't build a system of law on physics. A gun is just physics. Physical power. It doesn't create a moral obligation.
But in the real world, the guy with the gun does make the rules.
He makes them for now. But look at the logic. If might makes right, then the right changes every time someone stronger comes along. If I somehow get the gun away from the robber, well, suddenly I have the right.
So right is just a label for whoever's winning at the moment.
Exactly. And a right that disappears the second you lose a fistfight isn't a right at all. It's a meaningless word. Rousseau says we are only obliged to obey legitimate powers. Force is not legitimacy.
He even takes this to slavery. He says the idea of a person voluntarily selling themselves into slavery for nothing is just insane.
He calls it madness. He says to suggest a whole people would give themselves to a king for nothing, to just say, here, take our liberty, we get nothing in return, is to suppose a nation of madmen.
And madness doesn't create legal rights.
You can't sign a contract if you're delusional.
Okay, so nature's out, force is out, we need a deal, a contract.
And now, enter the social pact.
This is the core mechanism. But the terms of this contract are, well, they're intense. When I read this, I had to read it twice. He says the whole thing boils down to one clause.
Wishes.
The total alienation of each associate with all of their rights to the whole community.
Total alienation. It sounds terrifying, doesn't it? Like you're joining a cult. You give up everything.
It sounds like the opposite of the freedom he promised. How does giving up all my rights make me free?
Yeah.
It sounds like I just made myself a slave to my neighbors.
This is the magic trick. Rousseau argues that the condition has to be equal for everyone. If I give myself up completely and you give yourself up completely, then nobody has any advantage over anyone else.
That's like mutually assured destruction of individual rights.
In a way. And since the condition is equal for all, no one has an interest in making the rules too tough for others because they'd just be hurting themselves.
Right, if I vote for a law that says everyone has to wear a silly hat, I have to wear the silly hat too.
And then there's this great paradox. By giving yourself to everyone, you give yourself to no one.
That's the key phrase. You aren't submitting to a king, some specific person. You're submitting to the sovereign. And in Rousseau's world, we are the sovereign.
We have to be really careful with that word because we hear sovereign and we think of a monarch.
Right.
For Rousseau, the sovereign is the active body of all the citizens acting together, collectively. When we're active, making the rules, we are the sovereign. When we're passive, obeying those rules, we are subjects.
So we are our own bosses, we write the contract, and then we have to live by it.
Yes. But this raises a huge question. If we're the boss, how do we decide what to do? What if I want to lower taxes and you want to build a bridge?
This is where we get to the idea of the general will. And I think this is the most misunderstood part of the whole book.
It is so tricky. He makes a distinction between the general will and the will of all.
Which sounds like the same thing.
They do, but they're not. The will of all is just a sum of private interests. It's just a pile of selfishness.
Okay, so if everyone votes for what puts the most money in their own pocket and we add it up, that's the will of all.
Exactly. The general will is different. The general will is when everyone votes on what is best for the group itself. It looks only to the common interest.
So if I vote to build a hospital because I know the town needs it, even though I'll have to pay more in taxes and I personally hate hospitals, I'm voting with the general will.
You're thinking as a citizen, not as an individual. And Rousseau is very strict here. He says for the general will to actually be heard, you can't have factions, no political parties.
Which is pretty much all we have today.
Right. He says as soon as you have parties, people stop thinking, is this good for the state? And start thinking, is this good for my party?
The voice of the people stops being the voice of the whole and becomes the voice of the loudest group.
It breaks the math. You just have a dominant private opinion bullying everyone else.
Okay, so let's look at the trade-off here. We sign this contract. We give up our natural right to just grab whatever we can. What do we actually get in return?
We trade natural liberty for civil liberty. In the state of nature, your freedom is only limited by your own physical strength. But you have to sleep with one eye open.
That's stressful.
Very. In the civil state, you lose the right to just grab the apple. But you gain property. You get a legal title to your own apple that the whole community will now defend for you.
He talks about it like a spiritual upgrade. We go from being stupid, limited animals to intelligent beings.
It is an elevation. But we have to address the dark side of this. The contract has teeth, sharp ones. It involves the right of life and death.
Yeah, this part is pretty heavy.
Rousseau's logic is that the state's whole purpose is to preserve your life. But that safety isn't free, it's conditional.
Because the state protects you, you have to be willing to die for the state.
You have to. So if the state says, we're at war and we need you to march into that cannon fire, you have to go. You can't enjoy the safety without accepting the risk.
And it applies to criminals too. When the state executes a criminal, he doesn't see it as a punishment. He sees it as war.
Exactly. By breaking the social contract, the criminal has become a rebel, an enemy. They're no longer a member of the body.
Okay, so we have the sovereign, which is us, and we have the general will. How does the sovereign actually speak?
Through laws. And again, Rousseau's very specific. A law can only be about general, abstract things.
What does that mean?
It means the law can say, we will have a king, or thieves will be punished, but the law cannot say, John Smith will be king, or John Smith is a thief.
Because as soon as you name a specific person, you're not being general anymore.
You're not. The sovereign creates the structure. It doesn't manage the day-to-day details. The general will is blind to individuals.
This leads to one of the weirdest characters in the book, the legislator.
The legislator is almost a mythical figure. Think of Lycurgus in Sparta, or Moses.
But wait, if we are the sovereign, why do we need a legislator? Can't we just write the laws ourselves?
Because, frankly, we're often stupid, or at least short-sighted. Rousseau says the general will is always right, but the judgment that guides it is not always enlightened.
So the people want what's good, but they don't always see what's good.
Right. So the legislator is like an outside consultant.
That's a great way to put it.
He comes in, drafts the Constitution, designs the whole system, but, and this is critical, He has absolutely no power to pass those laws.
He can write them, but he can't sign them.
Only the people can. His job is to convince a whole crowd of people to completely change their way of life based on a plan he came up with.
That sounds like an impossible sales pitch.
Which is why Rousseau says the legislator often has to resort to, let's call it divine marketing.
Big lies.
He puts the laws in the mouths of the gods. He says, I didn't write this. A higher power told me.
So religion is just a political tool.
For the founding of a state, yes. It's used to persuade people who can't be convinced by complex philosophy. But Rousseau is clear. This only works if the laws are actually good. The real miracle isn't the claim of divinity. The miracle is the wisdom of the law itself.
Okay, let's look at the machinery of the state. We have the sovereign, which is the people. We have the laws. But who actually does the work?
This is where we have to separate the state from the government. And he is obsessed with this distinction.
I think we mix these up all the time.
We do. Rousseau says, no. The sovereign is the will, the legislative tower. It decides what we want to do. The government is the force, the executive power. It physically does it.
So the government is just the employee of the sovereign?
Exactly. It's just the intermediary. But here's the problem, and this is where Rousseau gets really pessimistic. The government is made of people.
And those people have their own wills.
Correct. The government is a mini body inside the big body of the state. And naturally, that mini body wants power for itself. The officials, they want to be the sovereign.
He calls this the inherent vice of the body politic. It's like a cancer that starts growing the day the state is born.
He says the government inevitably, constantly tries to usurp the sovereign. It's a natural friction. He says just as old age destroys a man, the government eventually destroys the state.
So the death of the state is inevitable.
Totally. He asks, if Sparta and Rome perished, what state can hope to endure forever? He's very clear. This machine is going to break. Our job is just to make it last as long as we can.
That's cheerful. But before it dies, we have to pick a type of government. And he has some very surprising takes on democracy here.
He does. When he says democracy, he means the entire people actually doing the administration, executing the laws, managing the details.
And he thinks that's a terrible idea.
He thinks it's impossible. He says, if there were a people of gods, they would govern themselves democratically. So perfect a government is not for men.
Why not?
Just think of the logistics. You'd need a tiny state where everyone knows each other. You'd need total equality of wealth. He says it's just too unstable. It leads to civil wars.
So he actually prefers aristocracy.
Elective aristocracy, specifically.
Yeah.
What we might call a meritocracy. The wisest govern the multitude. He thinks it's the best order, as long as you can be sure they govern for your profit and not for their own.
And then there's monarchy.
He admits monarchy is the most vigorous. One person, one will. It's incredibly efficient. But the downside is huge. Kings want to be absolute. They don't want a prosperous people. They want a weak, miserable people who can't resist them.
He also throws in this whole section on climate, which sounds pretty wild to us today.
Yeah.
He's basically saying freedom is a function of temperature.
It's the climate theory, yeah. He argues that government depends on the land. In hot climates, he thinks people need less food and are naturally more passive.
So hot weather equals despotism.
In his view, yes. Cold climates produce barbarism. It's only in the temperate zones like Europe that you find the sweet spot for good government.
So the state is going to die. The government is trying to eat the sovereign. How do we keep this thing alive as long as possible?
We have to keep the heart beating. Rousseau uses a biological analogy. The legislative power, the sovereign, is the heart. The executive, the government, is the brain.
A man can survive if his brain is damaged, but if the heart stops, he's dead.
Exactly. To keep the heart beating, he prescribes one thing: fixed, periodic assemblies of the people.
This is the part that must have terrified rulers. He says when the people are legitimately assembled, the government's power is suspended.
It has to be. The master is present, so the servant isn't needed. When the people show up, the government has to shut up.
He says these assemblies are the nightmare of rulers who will do anything to prevent them.
Of course, because that's the moment the sovereign checks the government's work. It's the performance review.
He looks at Rome as the ultimate case study for all of this.
Yeah.
He loves the Roman model.
Rome is his obsession. He points to the tribunate. The tribunes were these special officers who had no executive power, no legislative power.
So what could they do?
They could prevent everything. They were the guardians of the laws. They were a shield for the people against the government. Rousseau thinks every free state needs something like that.
And on the flip side, he defends dictatorship, which I mean, that sounds terrible to a modern ear.
It does, but we have to understand the Roman definition. A dictatorship wasn't a permanent tyranny. It was a constitutional emergency break.
Right. Laws are inflexible.
hmm
Sometimes the state is about to collapse, and you can't wait 3 weeks for a committee meeting.
So you appoint a dictator to suspend the laws and save the state. But, and he's adamant about this, it has to be for a very short fixed term.
Like 6 months max.
Yes. If the danger passes and the dictator is still there, it becomes tyranny. It's a dangerous but necessary tool.
We're coming to the end of the text, and Rousseau drops what I think is his most provocative point for us today. It's about money, and it's about representation.
This is his finance critique, and it is absolutely blistering.
He basically says, as soon as public service ceases to be the main business of citizens, and they prefer to serve with their purses rather than their persons, the state is near ruin.
He calls finance a word of slaves. His argument is that you cannot pay someone to be free from you. Freedom is something you do, not something you buy.
If you pay troops to fight your wars instead of fighting yourself,
You get mercenaries who will eventually turn on you.
and if you pay deputies politicians to go and represent you,
You get sold.
this is a direct attack on representative democracy. We think voting for a representative is freedom? Rousseau says, no, that's just you being lazy.
He looks at the English system. He says the English people think they're free, but they're deluding themselves. They are free only during the election.
For that one moment in the voting booth.
Right. As soon as the election is over, they're enslaved. They're nothing because they've handed their will over to someone else.
Sovereignty cannot be represented because will cannot be represented. You can't hire someone to want things on your behalf.
Exactly. So in Rousseau's ideal world, we wouldn't have professional politicians. We'd ratify laws ourselves. We'd serve with our own arms.
And he admits this is incredibly hard.
But the principle holds. The moment you delegate your civic duty, you lose your liberty. You become a consumer of the state, not a citizen of it.
And yet, after all this pessimism, he ends on a weirdly hopeful note about the general will.
He says the general will is indestructible, even under a tyrant.
So when a dictator takes over, the general will doesn't just vanish.
No, it remains constant, unalterable, and pure. It just gets silenced. It gets subordinated to other, louder wills.
The citizens still deep down want what's good for the state.
They do, but they want their personal good more. They trick themselves. But the general will is still there, buried under all the selfishness.
It's a haunting image. The perfect society is always there, waiting, but we're usually too selfish to let it speak.
It challenges us to ask, when we vote, are we voting for what's good for us or for what's good for the body?
So we've gone from the chains of society all the way to the death of the state.
Rousseau paints a picture of freedom that is incredibly demanding. It's not just do whatever you want, it's do what is right to maintain the contract.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Rousseau says that in a truly free state, citizens do everything with their own arms and nothing with money.
In a modern world where we pay taxes, hire lobbyists, and elect career politicians to handle the business of the state for us, it raises a very uncomfortable question.
Are we actually free citizens?
Yeah?
Or are we just comfortable slaves with a really complex financing plan?
That is the question the social contract leaves us with.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.